What up? And welcome back to the Fitness Stuff for Normal People podcast. I'm Tony.
And I'm Marianna.
And the fitness industry right now is just not what it could be. It's become something built on unrealistic expectations, aesthetics, and external validation, just directing you away from the stuff that actually matters. The bottom line is we're not just trying to provide another fitness podcast, but completely change the fitness industry for the better by providing you with the knowledge and tools to give you the confidence in applying the best possible training and nutrition into your own life. Where today, I'm a little selfish, I had some fun putting this episode together. Today, we're taking you through exactly how to build the perfect push-pull-leg training program. From the pros and cons of doing a push-pull leg or PPL split versus a full body upper lower or bro split, to the exact exercise choice, how many sets and reps are going to be needed for your specific goal, and where specifically to implement progressive overload in your program. Everything you need to put your training on autopilot. And we actually even built our own 12-week push-pull leg training program that's available to all of our Fitness Stuff premium members this coming Friday, which sign up for our premium is in our show notes down below for just $5 a month. That's also where we do our bonus weekly Q&A episodes every single Friday and other cool shit like this training program.
And if you really like the episode or just the podcast in general, make sure to give us a 5-star review wherever you're listening and follow us over on Spotify. I think we're almost at 15,000 followers, which is really exciting. We appreciate the support. And a word from our longtime sponsor, Legion, who we love dearly, especially their protein powder. We talk a lot about Legion's whey protein isolate. They also have a casein protein. And the main difference between the two, casein is great for those who maybe struggle to feel fuller for a longer period of time, struggle with that hunger piece, because it actually slows digestion. So it does keep you fuller longer, whereas whey protein isolate is readily digested, quickly absorbed. Both serve a great purpose, but a lot of people don't really know or talk much about casein. Use the Legion link down in our show notes and use the code FSPOD at checkout for 20% off your first order or double points on every order after that. Let us know what you think.
Most people don't know about that because casein does have a little bit different of a texture than whey. It's a little more, what's the right word? A little more milky, like a little more milky into
Viscous?
it. Way better word. You're my thesaurus through these episodes. So, and that's like the cool thing. If you try a flavor and you're like, that texture, that flavor just didn't mix well, you can literally just get a free product in return if you didn't like it and you want to try something new. That's how much they care about it, which I think is always dope. What I'm more excited about, one, most important thing in my life, this episode. 2, what are you doing July 21st?
Me? What am I doing July 21st?
Yeah. The other person on the podcast.
When is July 21st? Is that like, what day of the week is that?
Really? Barbenheimer. Barbie movie and Oppenheimer both come out on July 21st.
Oh, I don't know what Oppenheimer is. Barbie movie, cool. That looks pretty good. I'm afraid of movie theaters, so typically don't go to the movie theater. I typically wait for them to come out. Sounds fun.
I'm ordering a G.I. Joe outfit on Amazon for Oppenheimer, and I'm wearing a pink thong underneath for Barbie, so we can do double header just back to back.
Wow.
Just kidding. No, but
that's really exciting.
There's been memes all over the internet. It's killing me. Back to back. I haven't done a double feature in like 10 years since I was a teenager. So July 21st, mark your calendars. Barbie, Oppenheimer come out. And it was shot by Christopher Nolan, which should be a good flick. Which also, side note, I've been seeing these hacks. It was shot on specialty film that's not available in all IMAX theaters. I wish I would have gotten the details for this. I'll try and put it on my social media. But there's only specific IMAX theaters that the screens are actually big enough to show the full shot. So most theaters that you see this in are going to be like trimmed off. And I'm pretty pumped just because it's supposed to be one of those huge. They didn't use CGI at all in this film. And there are atom bombs going off. I'm curious to see how we pulled that off. But
I might not get the same effect on my TV.
Just wait till it comes out on Prime in like 2 months. All right. So you're not going. That's what I'll be doing July 21st. But first, the more important thing. Let's talk about some training splits. When was that training split episode that we came out with initially? That was early on. Yeah, that was early on, right?
Yeah. We didn't dive too deep into each one because that would have been forever. So
yeah,
I smell a little bit of a series coming here. A little bit of a series.
You do? No, I do too, which I'm excited because I think the training split, how to build a training split, that was early on. And we talked about the importance of training volume, choosing rep schemes, things like that. But I don't think we spent a minute on choosing the right training split versus like full body versus upper lower versus push pull legs, which has got to be the most popular one out today. Push pull legs.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Yeah. And just like it's confusing. Just like figuring out the right training program for you or where to even begin. It's confusing and it's hard. So hopefully this breaks it down. And once we have a nice option to choose from different ones, when we have more episodes on the specific ones, you'll feel a little bit more comfortable. But I think the push pull leg is a great starting point, especially for our audience, because there's ways that you can optimize it, make it better if you're already familiar with it. I think it's a great split.
Yeah, that's why we chose it, because we get a lot of questions about which training split is the quote unquote best split. And we were thinking about doing a full episode, but we're like, dude, this would take forever.
Too long.
If we dove deep into each and every one. So that's why we decided to make a series. And that's why we chose push-pull legs to start, is not just because it's the most common, but it can really be molded to fit most people's goal. Whether your goal is to lose fat, build muscle, get stronger, recomp, or you just want to build your body's capability and you don't care about composition. It's a split that can really be molded super, super well. And we'll get into that as well. I think next one, I'm going to be trying to bribe Marianna to do a full body split breakdown. That's a new one that's really piqued my interest. But let's start here. Push, pull, leg. For those of you guys listening, I know a lot of people have heard PPL before, or push, pull, leg. They don't really know what exactly it means. It's one of the common workout splits, right? And it's been around for decades. It's probably one of the most proven workout splits of all time, the most popular one today. The idea of push, pull, leg is that it is a movement-based split, meaning it's built around the compound exercises, which we're going to get into, like bench press, deadlift, and squat, right? Or a regression of any of those movements, which we can still do. So, for example, push day, right? Where all of your pushing muscles are combined into one day. You train all muscles involved in pushing. Pull day is where you're working out all muscles that are involved in pulling, right? So mainly your back muscles and biceps, where your pushing muscles are your chest, your shoulders, and your triceps. And then leg day, I think we can all figure out what that means, but it's breaking them down so you can really work all of the muscle groups that work together in the same day. This is helpful because muscles generally, they work in pairs, right? When you're pushing a barbell off your chest, like in the bench press, you are having a primary mover, which is your chest muscle, but your triceps and your delts, or your shoulders, are also what's helping that weight move to the top, right? So those would be your secondary muscle groups that we're talking about a little bit later in here. But that's why I think this is such a powerful split, is it's really targeting all movements, and why it's a great place to start if you're a beginner, but also a good way to challenge if you're intermediate, all the way to sometimes advanced. Yeah, I think too. You're on the push-pull leg split right now, right?
I am on the push-pull leg split. I have been for a little while now. And I also like this one because it's very effective if you say you only want to do 3 days a week. I personally only train like 3 days a week doing weightlifting, and you can still target all the major muscle groups. I still feel like I can progress, but also I leave room in the rest of my week to do other things that I also enjoy, say like Pilates for me personally. I feel like we were just talking about this earlier, but a lot of people, especially if you're new to the gym, think it's just you have to go all or nothing, all in, all days a week, be in the gym for 2 hours. And that's so not at all what you need for it to be effective. And honestly, sometimes it's the opposite. So
every day and twice on
personally
Sundays
find that this is one of my favorites for sure, but that's my bias. It's my bias.
Yeah. We're going to go over the pros and the cons, but the pros of this don't just stretch to it being able to work all major muscle groups that work together in the same workout, but that you're also giving the other muscle groups a complete recovery day. Since most pulling muscle groups, for example, aren't interfering with your pushing muscle groups. So you're actually giving the muscles that you're working a complete rest day. And we know how important rest and recovery is, which overlaps and does something a little different when we're talking about like a full body split, which we will do a future episode on. But I think that's where it's a really nice balance between rest and intensity through the weeks, because you're actually giving yourself several days off. We'll go over who this is made for, but especially if you're someone who experiences delayed onset soreness for days after your training sessions, a push-pull leg split might work better than an upper, lower, or a full body, because you don't have to go in the next day when you're already sore as that can't get off the toilet and expected to do more squats or whatever it might be. Right. Yeah. So the main splits, and we do want to cover what the main splits are. I think the second most common to push-pull leg would be the bro split, which is, I mean, trash, essentially. Most people have figured that out now, but I think that would that used to be back in the day. Is that still the second most popular split, would you say?
I've had clients come in that were very resistant to me recommending against a bro split.
Against, okay, so it's still hot. Maybe I'm trapped in a
Yeah.
bubble. That's what I did for like the first few years
It's
when I was
not
like
as
16,
popular,
17.
definitely, but
It's once
yeah,
it's once you mature. There's
yeah.
stages where you graduate from when you get into the gym
Mhm.
life, right? The first few years, you're doing that bro split 6 days a week, right?
Yeah.
Bro split, for example, it's like a body part split where each single day is dedicated to one muscle group. Chest day, back day, arm day, shoulder day, leg day, which always made me laugh. I think that's why it's called the bro split, is because they split up the upper body muscle groups to one day
Yeah.
each week, and then they just put all of your legs on one, which cracks me up. Like, we're not doing a quad day, a hamstring day, a glute day. We're just going to group that all together. So 5 out of the 6 days per week are going to be upper body. But it's really not optimal for most goals. And we'll talk about that more in different episodes. But this way, you're only hitting each muscle group once per week, which isn't going to be the most optimal for most body composition change. If you want to grow stronger and bigger, you're going to want a little bit more frequency than that. And there's many other reasons why, but the bro split's usually just the least optimal way to go about it compared to a push-pull leg, an upper-lower, and a full body. An upper-lower split is just separating your training days into an upper body day versus a lower body day. That's pretty common just given the name. So essentially almost combining your push and your pull day together and then just doing a leg day. And then the full body split, which I think we're going to do when we do another round of this one, because this is what I'm experimenting with myself now, is essentially where you're training every major muscle group every day that you are training through the week, which in my head didn't make sense because of the rest and recovery argument, but we'll talk about this more on that episode. It's a little bit more interesting and more intricate than that. And I think a lot of more intermediate to advanced lifters could get a lot from the full body split. But those are, I think, generally the 4 that people choose from, or a hybrid of one of them. Am I forgetting one? I feel like that there's more than that.
I feel like those are the big, no, those are, people come up with those are the big ones, I would say, the big main ones. I don't think you're missing one.
Yeah. And when I say hybrid of the days, it's like you can do a push-pull leg upper-lower hybrid where you do a push-pull leg upper-lower day or something like that. That's what I mean when I say hybrid. And that is going to be one of the things we talk about on how to make this potentially work better. But when it comes down to choosing a split, like how do you know the push-pull leg split or the upper body, lower body, or whatever split is right for you? You have to realize a few things going into this. I think we made this pretty clear on the How to Build a Training Program episode, right? Your biceps do not care if they get trained on arm day or pull day or upper body day. They don't, right? They care if they get the right amount of exercise with the right weights and the right rest and recovery through the week. That's what they care about. It doesn't matter which split you choose. If you're training with those numbers in mind and to progressive overload, you can technically get to any goal with any workout split. Which split you choose is just going to make that a lot easier or harder based on how you split the week up. And I think that's the most important thing I need to say before we jump into this. Because how many times do you see people get lost in the details and forget the basics right there?
Yeah. Yeah. It's not like one, oh my God. So I'll still see so many people arguing which is best, which a bro split is inherently, I'm not going to go down a rabbit hole.
There might not be a best, but there definitely is a worst.
Yeah. But so many people get really, really caught up in what's best, what's most effective. And especially for beginners, I feel like that just takes away from a lot of the foundation of what is actually the most important depending on our goals, these principles that should lie within any training program. That's the most important piece. And then really finding what one works best for you and the level that you're at and your specific goals.
And honestly, if we're doing a whole episode on push-pull leg, it's obviously going to make it seem like it's the best thing that's ever been invented. But we're telling you before we go into it all, it's not magic, right? You have to still hit your total training volume through the week, or how many sets per muscle group per week. You have to train with intensity close to failure. You have to give your muscle the right rest and recovery, and you have to train to progressive overload, or none of it matters, right? You can do this in a lot of different ways, but who it's really made for, and I think who would excel in this and who it wouldn't, because that's what it's going to come down to. It's going to make certain lifestyles easier or harder to hit your goal. I think this split is incredible for, and I got to talk this one out for a second, beginner to intermediate lifters. And when I say beginner to intermediate lifters, I think so many people are like, I've been lifting out for like 5, 6, 7 years. That's not me anymore. What I mean by beginner to intermediate is 1 to 5 years dedicated training in the gym, not just working out, 1 to 5 years of dedicated training. And we've talked about the difference between working out and training, right? Working out being where you might have a split, you might have, who cares if it's push day, chest day, whatever. But if each day that you go in the gym, your workout looks a little bit different in the sense of you might be doing different exercises and different sets and different weights because you're feeling good or bad, there's no real structure to it. And we know that you need structure to build upon. We're a training program, like why we wanted to build the example, and we gave that 12-week program out to all of our premium members. Implementing progressive overload is to show you that you need structure to build upon, where each workout is intentionally building off the previous one to get you step by step closer to the goal you're trying to achieve. So I don't just mean people who've been working out for longer than 1 to 5 years. I mean people who have been doing a dedicated training program, which most people lie in that beginner to intermediate level. Would you say so too?
Yeah, I think so. I know people that have taken time off from the gym, like multiple years, and they'll get back in and still think that they're at this advanced level. I'm like, I feel like you're not. Like, if you've taken a few years off from the gym just because you understand and know it, like your body is not there yet. So I find, like, I recommend this to a lot of people who are trying to get back into the gym after taking like 3-4 years off.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Or even just a little bit of time. But that's the whole point, is a lot of people want to say they're advanced because they've been lifting for a long time. It's okay to be intermediate, because if you know where you stand, you're going to make more progress. And it can work for advanced lifters as well, especially advanced lifters with like more of a strength focus, because these are movement-based days, which we'll get into. But it's great for strength and hypertrophy focused goals, which I think people lose sight of this. If your goal is to lose body fat or to recomp, you should be weight training like your goal is strength and hypertrophy focused. Like, remember when Bill Campbell came on and he did the great analogy where it's your resistance training program is kind of like the heartbeat that just keeps going year round. It doesn't change too much, right? Whether you're trying to build muscle, build strength, lose fat, you're still going to be progressing in very similar ways. Your diet is more or less what's going to dictate what happens to you. Yeah. But it's kind of like that heartbeat, right? So this is really great for most people working out. I'd say 80% of people working out could benefit from some sort of a push-pull leg split. And that's why we're doing this today. Now, the biggest con, I think, because there's pros and cons to every workout split that we use. The biggest con, but we'll also provide a workaround of how to get around this, is the push-pull leg. If you have a goal that is strength or hypertrophy focused or recomp focused, which if you're just caring about your body's capabilities, your maintenance, this doesn't pertain to you. But if you want to build muscle and strength optimally, you're going to be training each muscle group more than once per week. And the push-pull leg split on paper is usually split out between once per week, but it's just over and over again in the research. If you want to build muscle optimally, if you want to build strength optimally, you're usually training muscle groups more than once per week. But that's also something that you can easily work around doing a push-pull leg split, where I think most people set it up to a 7-day routine where you do push on Monday, pull on Wednesday, leg on Friday, and all the other days are rest. You could change that into a 4 or 5-day rotation where you do push, pull, leg, rest, push, pull, leg, rest, not dedicated on what day of the week it necessarily is. You could also do a 6-day on or 2 times a week. So PPL off day. That's a pretty dedicated split where you really got to manage your volume and your intensity well. If you're doing 6 days per week and it's a push, pull, leg, 2 time a week split, that stuff. Or you could also add in 1 or 2 extra workouts on top of your push, pull, leg if you want 4 or 5 workouts a week, either focusing on the muscle groups that you really want to emphasize. Like if you're a dude who's a typical dude and you do a push, pull, leg and you want to add another push day for those mirror muscles, or a little pull because you really want to protect your posture, look at that big wide look, you can add in other things that you want to emphasize because your individual goal matters, right? Like how many times do we talk about that?
That's also what I really like about this program, is that is an easy workaround. Like, that's the biggest con, but there's so, especially if you really like this one, like, don't let that deter you from trying to make it work, because there are a lot of things you could do. So many girls that, you know, I've written programs for on a push-pull leg because they really like it, but they really want to focus on their glute. Okay, we have 2 leg days. One of them is glute focused. And at the beginning of, maybe you want to do, you shouldn't be doing a full day of glutes 3 times a week. You shouldn't be doing that. So it's kind of takes some time to learn that. Most people have specific parts of their body maybe they want to dedicate more time to. This type of program leaves room for that. But yeah, I really like that.
Yeah, which again is the note. We were just talking about this before we started recording today, but how oftentimes if you're just looking at social media, it's very easy to forget what your actual goals are or your actual wants are for what everyone else is wanting to do. Like if everyone else is just going through cut and bulk, a lot of people, and we were talking, a lot of coaches who do like bodybuilding coaches or prep coaches, that's what they're used to doing is bulk cut. So they'll project those goals onto whoever's coming in, where you got to remember, what are you realistic? What do you want? Like in your perfect example, if you care more about leg growth while just maintaining everything else, a lower body push pull lower body split throughout the week might work a lot better. And it's an easy thing to work around. So figure out what's important to you and then tether it towards that. And that's why we like this split a lot too, is it's easy to tether the specific goals to with a good base and foundation.
Yeah.
Right now, we're going to talk about what's important when setting this up. So we're going to talk about how to set up your total training volume, which if you're unfamiliar with what that word means and what that means specifically, like if you couldn't recite that to me if I asked you, this is probably the most important piece that you could listen to. After that, we're going to go through rep ranges set up and then exercise choice, which is going to be absolutely huge for this split. And then we put it all together. So when we're talking about training volume, and here's why I say it's the most important aspect that most people need to realize, is when we talk about training volume, it's referred to as a few different things if you calculate it out. People can technically refer to your total training volume as your sets, your reps, and your weight lifted throughout the week. Some might just consider it sets and reps. But when we're talking about it in this context, we're simply just saying how many sets per muscle group are you doing each week? That's it. How many sets? And I think most people aren't used to getting asked that question. They're used to paying attention. What's the best rep range for muscle growth? What's the best rep range for toning? What's the best rep range for strength? You can make equal progress in any rep range for any goal. The sets that you're doing matter much, much more. I mean, just calculating this out, right? Just look at your day through the week and just see where you land. We're going to talk about the sweet spot where you kind of want to land for optimal muscle growth, for strength, for progress, is between about 8 and 20 hard sets per muscle group per week, meaning close to failure sets. So go back in your little training log, if you have one. If you don't, download an app like Stacked or Strong Lifts, one of the free apps to track your workouts, and just count how many sets did you do on your chest last week? How many sets did you do on your quads last week? How many sets? Figure that out, because that's the baseline where you can figure out in a couple minutes whether or not your training program is going to be successful. That I think, how many people do you think actually look at that stuff?
No, I feel like
10% maybe less.
Yeah.
But it's the most important aspect.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel like what a lot of people don't get until they've started to be consistent with lifting effectively is it can be boring. Like you love it. People love it and it's great. But I think that's why people, like especially fitness influencers and coaches, don't admit it. Is like, no, it can be, you can feel a little repetitive and it can feel a little bit boring, but that's a good sign because you're not just doing a bunch of random workouts and trying a new thing every single day. For it to be effective, sometimes it's a little bit boring and it's a little bit repetitive. There's obviously ways to make it, not like you shouldn't be doing the same exact thing every single day, obviously, but you shouldn't have your program changing every single week. And I think a lot of people, no one really talks about that. Everyone loves the gym. Because people who talk about it love it.
We kind of dove deep on, I forget which episode that was, about like the HIIT classes, like the F45, the Orange Theories, things like that, where again, they've got their pros for what they're made for as well. But the approach of every single day is completely different. It's very poor for overall progress. So let's talk about how we want to set this up and how we want to count this. Right now, when we say 8 to 20 hard sets per muscle group per week, I'm going to give you some examples. But when I say hard sets, right, we're talking about sets that are at an RPE of 7 or above. And if you don't know what RPE is, essentially what it means is you're training within 1 to 3 reps of failure, is what that means. So the only sets that you should be counting towards this 8 to 20 goal are sets that are taken between 1 and 3 repetitions close to failure. Meaning if you do 10 reps, if I had a gun next to your head with whatever weight you were lifting, you could not have done 14 reps to save your life, right? It's got to be right next to that line. I don't think many people realize how challenging that is to come that close to true failure. Yeah. Choose an exercise that's safe to fail on, like a bicep curl. And I want you to push it until your bicep physically gives up, until your bicep quits. Or you're doing an overhead press and you're trying for a few seconds and it just quits. That's what failure is. If you want a better way to gauge how close and how hard you should be working, I would say go back and listen to that episode for sure a few weeks ago where we break down a few different topics.
We'll link it in the show
But
notes.
It's working hard. It's working really, really hard. And that's what we count as those 8 to 20 hard sets per muscle group per week. Now, what that means is any less than 8 and you're going to have a hard time moving the needle forward, right? You can
Mm-hmm.
maintain your progress super, super well doing 8 or fewer sets per muscle group per week, but you're going to have a hard time moving that needle forward. And any more than 20, and you start to experience diminishing returns, right? Where if you do 25 sets, 30 sets, you're not only not going to make more progress than doing just 20 sets, but you're potentially doing less. And here's my argument to people who are doing 25, 30, 35 sets on one muscle group per week, like their chest or anything else, is I can almost guarantee you, you are not training with the right intensity if you're able to do that many sets per muscle group per week. So when I see like these, so I've had multiple women come in with these glute programs that are doing 40 sets on their glutes per week, and it's not giving them the progress they want to see. It's like, no, duh. It's like you can't handle the high enough intensity, the weights that are actually needed to grow a muscle group when you're doing that much. You can't. So if you count back your muscle groups per week and you're doing that little tally right now, and you figure out you're doing much more than 20 on anything, it's time to reassess and say, okay, maybe I'm not working as hard as I thought I was during those sets. And I might make a little more progress if I dial those back. And for that is a big range. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but essentially more does not equal better, right? More from where you are. Progressive overload, progressively putting more tension on your muscle over time. If you figure out you're doing 10 sets per muscle group per week, maybe a next logical jump for progressive overload would be working up to 11 or 12 sets per muscle group per week. You don't need to jump to 20 thinking you'll make optimal progress, right? So what I mean by how many sets per week you have, and this can be broken down in a few different ways. So I just did this on a sample of like a push day, right? Or a chest focus day. So if we're talking about your chest and aiming for 8 to 20 hard sets per muscle group per week, we can see how a workout split where you're working out and training a muscle group multiple times per week could be beneficial, because it can be very hard to condense all of your training volume for 1 week into one single day on a muscle group. Another reason why a full body split has a little pro and con here too. But for example, if you were going to do all the volume on your chest in one day, you could do 3 sets of bench press, 3 sets of cable flies, 3 sets of incline dumbbell press, 3 sets of hammer machine press, and 3 sets of dips. That is 15 total sets on your chest. And that's all you need for a week. Where if you split it up into 2 days or 3 days, right, you don't have to do nearly as many. Like if you split it up just simply into 2 days, you could do 4 sets of bench and 4 sets of cable flies on day 1, no more chest. And then on day 2, do 4 sets of dumbbell press and 3 sets of dips. That's it on each of those days. So you have a little bit more time to break these different muscle groups apart. So one thing I do want to advise is, as you're choosing these days, keep the sets you're doing throughout the week at front of mind. If you are opting for a 4-day, a 5-day, a 6-day split, you should not be having massive workouts every day if it's 6 days a week. You shouldn't. If you're spending more than an hour in the gym, honestly, probably more than 45, 50 minutes in the gym, 6 days a week of just weight training, I would guess that you have some sort of junk volume involved, or doing more than that. 20 is what we'll call junk volume, right? Like I don't see a context where you need more time than that. Do you?
No. Oh my goodness, no. And for a lot of people, that's really hard to wrap their heads around. I think it's part of this fear, especially for people, especially for people who have been in the gym for a little bit of time, this fear of losing gains. Like, that's real. It's real. The anxiety of not going to the gym or feeling it's real, and it's honestly costing you. It's doing more harm than good, that type of overtraining.
We've all been there though. I know when I first started out, the first few years when I was like 17, 18, 19 years old, I just was obsessed with it. Like the gym was just my happy place. I could not wait to be back in the gym. I spent an hour and a half to 2 hours there, like 5, 6, sometimes 7 days a week. 7th day, I'd still know I need recovery, but I'd just be there to be there because it made me happy. So I get it, right? Just go walk around, talk to people, hit the sauna. I get it, but you got to realize you got to scale back. If you're one of those people, like I love a 4-day training program for optimal strength and hypertrophy. 4 to 5 days is all you need max. 3 to 4 days you can even get away with. But if you're going to choose for those 5 or 6 days because you love it, that's awesome. Maybe spend more time doing some mobility work and things like that. But if you spend too much time on those, you got to realize you're doing more harm than good. Which is where I see a lot of people who are in their first few years there. Now, that's the most important step. So we got to realize whatever we break it down into, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, 6 days, we got to line up your sets per week according to that. So once we go through exercise choice, we can talk about that more. The next big thing is talking about rep ranges, right? What reps should we use depending on each of these? I think this is the interesting part that I know we talked about a little bit in that episode, But it makes more sense once we talk about exercise choice next, about how compound movements or multiple muscle group movements are going to be a focus. And rep ranges, I mean, I remember reading the NASM textbook, and I don't know if it's still like that today, but when I was going through different cert programs, I mean, they were teaching and preaching the whole, well, I think 1 through 6 is strength training only. 6 through 12 or 8 through 12 is for hypertrophy only. 12 through 20 is endurance only. Do you remember that? Or whenever you were first getting introduced to that, was that the teaching style?
Well, I feel like that's still loosely today in terms of
Yeah.
but it's not, it's very flawed just having that one way of
extremely
explaining it.
That just cracked me
especially
up
just with
seeing
more
it in the
research.
textbook, like in the actual
Yeah.
textbooks. Like
It's
this is supposed to
definitely,
be
I mean, when I was learning it in school, that was it. Yeah. Which it probably seems like forever ago now.
I know we're getting
old.
up there, old buddy.
I'm old.
But yeah, in those, which if you're going through like a NASM or anything and you're listening to this, reach out to us and let us know if that's what they're still teaching, because we got a big problem if that's the case. Now, why we say that's a big problem, and there's some truth to those ranges, but all research in the last 10 years is really showing us you can make equal progress when it comes to hypertrophy specifically, or muscle growth, at any rep range, at 3 reps, at 12 reps, at 30 reps. The one thing that's important is that you're training close to failure, within 3 reps of failure. And if you're doing that every set and you're hitting the right amount of sets, you could do however many reps your little heart desires. And that will be the best to make progress. Now, here's where I think, tied down to a push-pull leg routine, this is my argument. I'm sure there's arguments against this too, so I want to hear your thoughts. I actually argue for probably a little bit lower rep scheme overall. And I think this is common in the bigger, leaner, stronger, thinner, leaner, stronger. Mike Matthews has a very similar approach towards this as well. But I want to start off by highlighting a pretty well-designed study out of the University of South Florida with already resistance-trained individuals. And they were essentially just separated into 2 separate groups: a high-volume, moderate-intensity group that did 4 workouts per week, consisting of 4 sets per exercise in the 10 to 12 rep range, working at about 70% of their 1 rep max, versus a moderate volume, high intensity group that did 4 workouts per week, consisting of 4 sets per exercise in only the 3 to 5 rep range, closer to their 90% 1 rep max. So essentially the only difference between these 2 groups is one was training in the 10 to 12 rep range, one was 3 to 5. Now, both groups did the same exercises: bench press, back squat, deadlift, and seated shoulder press. They ate the same and were working close to failure. All the important boxes are checked. Now, after the 8 weeks of training in this specific study, the high intensity group, or the closer to fit, like the 3 to 5 rep range group, gained significantly more strength, which isn't too much of a shocker, and muscle compared to the 10 to 12 rep range group. The strength, I think people can wrap their heads around, right? You're training with heavier weights, you're going to probably get a little bit stronger, and data is pretty consistent with that. But even more significantly more size compared to the 10 to 12, or quote unquote NASM style. I'm just pooping on NASM. I'm sorry if they changed their word, but the quote unquote hypertrophy range. And I think this is interesting. Now, researchers cited 2 main reasons for why the heavier training beat out the lighter training, right? And I think this is huge when it comes to compound movements, what we're talking about next, is when you're training with heavier weights, you have higher amounts of mechanical stress that are imposed on your muscles, right? Higher amounts of mechanical stress, which mechanical tension, that's the one biggest driver of hypertrophy, right? And when you're lifting heavier weights, one thing you notice too, especially if you are trained, if you have good form, is that you see a greater activation in the actual muscle fibers when you're lifting heavier weights compared to lighter weights, because you need them, right? You ever feel a heavy weight, you need all the muscle you can get, and your body knows that, where you can get away with some sloppy forms and thrown around with lighter weights, right? So both of those are going to in turn result in just a much greater adaptation across a greater percentage of muscle tissue, right? So I actually argue, and this is where I stand with the rep ranges, is I'm a bigger fan of like working in your 80 to 85% of your 1 rep max range. So heavier loads that are more under control, that are close to failure, and that are multiple joint movements, which is what we're talking about next, like squats, like deadlifts, or regressions of, because you don't have to be a pro at these movements to include a squatting movement or a deadlift movement in your program. But that usually lands out to be anywhere in even the 4 to 8 rep range for most of it. And rep ranges we talked about in the training program too. But I'm a bigger fan of these heavier weights recently, especially when we're focusing on compounds, which we'll talk about next. But I want to know if you share a similar view on that size now, because I know there's so much debate and random stuff going on with reps.
This is so funny that this is, because we have a Q&A actually that just happened last week for you guys listening now. And it was about this exact question about rep ranges and how important are they for whether or not you want to build muscle or lose fat. Is there a certain rep range you should work in? And it was really focused largely also towards the debate that if you want to lean out, you should do, higher reps, lower weight, that piece. But it is such a hot and heavily debated topic in this field still today. And I entirely agree with that. I feel like people get very, very caught up in what rep range is, perfect or the most optimal, and aren't looking at if they're working close to failure. Mm-hmm. So what's the best range for you to work in that's going to get you closer to failure on these compound movements? Yeah. Is that 13 to 15 reps doing a deadlift? No, probably not. And that's where I feel like the other camp can't win, because you can't argue. Yeah. You can't argue that. When you're thinking about moving heavier weight and what that does to your muscles at a physiological level and how that helps them change, helps them grow, you cannot be putting them under that much stress over and over again doing really high reps.
Yeah.
You just can't. There's
no
competition.
You get so fatigued.
Yeah. So.
Well, and you probably can speak this too. You've coached in person. You've been coached in person. I've been, if anyone's ever played sports throughout their life with practices with coaches in their face, that when it gets to, it's harder to control, like you said, how close to failure you're working, the higher you go with reps or the lighter weights you go. Because if you're going to 20 repetitions and that you're using a lighter weight on whatever it is, if you've got a coach who once you hit 20 and you're like, that is failure for me, but you have a coach in your face say, you are not allowed to put the weight on the bar until you do 5 more reps. Yeah. How many? You can do 5 more reps. You can always crank out a few more. So it's really hard to really identify where failure is, where when you've got 4 to 8 reps in those shorter ranges, you get a real clear idea of where exactly failure is, or at least a lot closer to. Mm-hmm. So in controlling the intensity, I feel like that's where this rep range beats out. Not that you can't make more progress or the same progress with higher reps, but it's much easier to control at this rep range, which is huge. Oh, that gave me PTSD, like to back in like high school sports and stuff like that. Yeah. Just getting it. Which you probably with athletes and stuff like that made the athletes do it even more, which is kind of funny.
No. Well, because with the pre-professional athletes that I worked with, they're like, you baby them. So you have to be really careful about injury prevention too. So that's also why.
Valid point.
That's different. High school is completely different. It's I feel like it's a superiority complex for high school sports coaches. Like they're just like feel like they get to live out. I don't know. I feel like with football coaches, especially, like they will drill these football players who are really good into the ground because they were never good.
I would do it just because I think it'd be fun. They're like little kids, you can bounce back from anything. Funny. Yeah, I would just pound them into the ground just for fun. Be like, because they talk back. I'd be like, you piece of.
Like my volleyball coach was she just sucked and like would kill us. And I'm like, you just literally hate us.
It builds
That's
character.
All I feel like.
They hate you, but it builds character. I freaking love it. But that's why I think in most rep ranges, and we'll talk about, because it's also important not to just stick to one specific rep range. We're going to include different ones. And in our program for the premium, you guys are already going to see this. There's a multitude of rep ranges used with intent of why exactly we put them in there. But the bulk of your training, we're going to keep in this rep range. And the main reason being, and what we caught towards the end, is that we're involving multiple joint movements. So this is where we get more into the push-pull leg split and how to set this up, because it's a movement-based split. It's a movement-based split that really revolves around these compound exercises, right? If you're hearing this word and you're like, I've heard it before, but I don't exactly know what it means. There's 2 primary types of weightlifting exercises. There's compound and there's isolated exercises. A compound exercise or compound exercises involve multiple major muscle groups and require most whole body strength and effort. For an example, a barbell back squat involves moving your knees, your ankles, and your hip joints in a coordinated effort with your quads, your hamstring, your glutes, your core, and your lats, and even more if we want to get more technical about it, in every single repetition, where an isolated exercise involves one muscle group and requires significantly less whole body strength and effort, i.e., a bicep curl, a cable fly, a tricep push down, when you are isolating one individual muscle or muscle group, right? Like a bicep curl involves one joint at your elbow and the bicep muscle doing all the work, right? So there's compound and there's isolated, and there's more compound, there's less and there's more isolated. But these are mostly going to revolve around compound movements, right? We're going to focus on compound movements for a couple of reasons. One, they train many muscle groups at once, like we just said, making them more efficient, helping you gain more muscle over time. And especially if you're someone who balances your lifestyle, like I know Marianna and I both do. We're training 3-4 days a week, right? You're on a 3-day split. I think I'm on a 4-5 if you count mobility day, but 4-day where if you don't want to be in the gym forever, one set of squats is going to hit more muscle groups than separating out into 4 or 5 different exercises. Doing a leg extension on your quads, a leg curl on your hamstrings, a 45 hyper on your glutes, a lat pull down on your lats. It's putting all of that together into one. So they have a lot of power behind it. 2 is compound movements. They let you lift heavier weights, right? The more muscle you're able to coordinate, and why nailing form down first is always more important, so you can nail form. The more muscle you're able to coordinate, the more weight you'll be able to lift. So not just the more total muscle fiber you're able to target, but the more weight you'll be able to lift, which is the most important rule, or just making progressive overload easier, right? If you can constantly be lifting more, overloading your weight. The great example I like to give, who people are like, they give arguments against compound exercises like the bench and the squat and things like that. Like let's take bench press versus even a dumbbell bench press, which is still a solid, you could argue, compound movement too. But why barbell compounds are usually powerful too. How much easier is it? Like, for example, my barbell bench press, I can do about 315 for about 6 to 8 reps. How much easier is it going to be over the next few weeks for me to increase that 315 to 320 or 325 versus, I think my dumbbells, man, I haven't done those in a minute, but let's say I'm doing 120s or 125s. It's going to take me a lot longer to get to that next ring up from 125 to 130 on dumbbells than it is to just put 5 or 10 more pounds on a barbell, right? So I think it makes progressive overload easier. Maybe I just have a fat crush on barbells. I don't know. That's my
I think you do. I think that's the answer.
There's not a perfect way to do it, but do you like barbells or dumbbells more? Like free weight style?
I'm a dumbbell girl through and through, except for
dumbbell
hip
girl.
thrusts. I think that just comes down to, I personally feel like I have more control, but I think that that's just completely individual. I personally don't think one is better than the other. I think some can be more suited to people's biomechanics, like dumbbell versus barbell.
For example, a dumbbell bench press and a bench press would still be considered compound movements because you're using multiple muscle groups. You're still doing it. I like barbells more if you have the availability to use them because I think it's a little bit easier to implement progressive overload. But dumbbells also help you more with coordination, with feeling the right muscle groups while you're doing them. So they have their pros and cons, and ideally you'd include both of them in there. But if you have them available, for example, like the starting exercise in our training program that we made for premium is starting with a barbell exercise, but you can always sub it with a dumbbell, like a barbell back squat, a barbell bench press, a barbell deadlift, which you can easily substitute, right, as you go on. And it's usually better to start with dumbbells before just jumping straight to barbell.
And I think that's a perfect example of how much your goals really do matter. Because like for me, my goal is not right now to move as much weight as possible. That's not it. I really, really am focusing on form, adjusting my tempo, maintaining my strength. I'm not really building much. So I'm not really worried about running out of, being able to put more weight on my bench press. So dumbbells are perfect for that. Whereas on a hip thrust, feeding into the stereotypes of being a girl who lifts, I guess, I use a barbell because I can put more weight on it.
I was gonna say, it's just hard to do with just dumbbells.
Yeah. And it also, it hurts your hip bones really bad because you have you can't put a pad on it.
Yeah.
I always cringe ridiculous. Like whenever I see someone with like an 80-pound dumbbell on their hips, I'm like, doesn't that hurt?
It's gotta hurt. Well, it's got to hurt. And then it's like you can handle, like that's one of the strongest lifts in the gym for most people is a hip thrust. So
Yeah.
most people, even if you're just like in the first 6 months, can probably handle more than 80 pounds, which I think is
Oh,
interesting.
for sure. For sure. But
Yeah.
that's like, that hurts. Still having the two like weights, like, right. At least for me. I'm like,
Oh,
no.
for me, for everybody, it's the worst. But it's again, compound movements are compound movements where you're doing multiple joints. So they can be dumbbell, barbell, anything. And another one that I think is interesting, but I think I want to put a side note to it is compound movements do significantly raise hormones like testosterone and growth hormone significantly more than others, which the effects, these don't influence muscle gain as much as a lot of people would make you believe. Some people tout that as like, here's why you need to squat is because it'll boost your testosterone and lead to all this. It's not going to lead to meaningful muscle group changes, but having those hormones a little bit higher over time results in a multitude of benefits in feeling good, your energy, your fatigue. So I'm a big fan, and that's just something I don't think should go unnoted, but it's not something that's going to like turn you from normal Hugh Jackman into Wolverine Hugh Jackman. Something else might be
I love Jason
artificially
Momoa.
raising his testosterone. Something else, who knows? And isolated exercises, they're still important to round out smaller muscle groups, like each head of your delts, for example, or your biceps, your triceps, your core, your calves, or even putting extra tension on bigger muscle groups like your quads for leg extension. So they're important, but how you want to structure each push, pull, and leg day is a movement, a compound movement to start the workout, and essentially just go on a sliding scale, start more compound, finish more isolated is, in my opinion, the best way to do it. Because if you start with isolated exercises, like for example, if you do 3 sets of leg extensions close to failure, and then you go try and squat, good luck not falling over, but 2, you're going to have a hard time. You're not going to be able to lift nearly as much weight on the squat, which is the goal, if one of your main muscle groups is fatigued. So you want to start with the bigger muscle groups, the bigger movements that require multiple muscle groups. And then as you go on and get more fatigued, that's when you split into isolated exercises. Right now, there's a million ways you can do this. And in the split that we built, the 12-week program, we put in different substitutes, because you have to realize when we say barbell back squat, there are probably 10 different regressions of that movement that would still be considered a good place to start. So whether you are day 1 in the gym or day 1,000 in the gym, there's multiple ways you can regress this. Or if you have specific injuries, right? Like a barbell back squat can be substituted to maybe a front squat, which is lighter weight but puts more on your quads. Could be substituted to a dumbbell goblet squat or sumo squat or leg press or TRX squat. You can regress these movements to whatever starting point you need and then move forward from there. This is, again, if we're talking no restrictions in the way, right? So we're going to go through, instead of just building out and going through like a sample of what these workouts could look like. 1, pick 4 to 5 of these workouts per day, push, pull, and leg. Make sure however many days you're doing them through the week, you hit the amount of sets, 8 to 20 hard sets per week, and start with bigger ones. So for example, we'll start with like a push day, right? Some really awesome compound movements for a push day to put towards the beginning of your workout are both a barbell flat and incline bench press, a dumbbell flat and incline bench press if you either don't have that available or don't want to work to it, a barbell overhead press or standing overhead press, a barbell seated overhead or military press, and one of my favorites lately is dips or weighted dips. Oh, I love dips. One of the best accessories you can add if you want to increase your bench press strength, by the way, is a dip and a weighted dip. FYI.
Yeah.
Those are some of my favorites to start on a push day before we get into isolated. Do you have any that you like a little more?
That's exactly what I include. And either, standing or seated overhead press, barbell, or dumbbell. Again, we already mentioned you can regress to a dumbbell. So don't just get intimidated and think you immediately can't do it because we say barbell. You could do a dumbbell.
There's so many different isolated movements, because this could be machines, this could be cables. Cables and machines are usually better for isolating movements, right? Like to isolate your chest, you could do a cable fly or a pec deck movement, right? You could do a close grip bench press, which is it is involving a couple different muscle groups, but it's more heavy, favoring your triceps. You could do skull crushers, both dumbbell, barbell, or even cable skull crushers, cable tricep push downs using the rope extension, huge, dumbbell or cable lateral raises, right? Anything that isolates one of those pushing muscle groups, your chest, a head of your delt, a tricep, anything where that is the prime mover is going to be an isolated exercise. For example, you could go to It's called exrx.net. exrx.net. And it will give you just a list on their homepage of every single muscle group. We'll put that in the show notes too, but it'll say like shoulders, deltoids, your anterior, lateral, posterior head of your shoulders. So the front, side, or back of your shoulders. You click on that and it will give you every exercise where that's a primary mover and a secondary mover. And here's what we say too, like there's no such thing as a perfect exercise or an exercise that you need in your program to make progress. So for example, if you don't like a bench press, barbell or dumbbell, you don't have to do one to make progress. Find something you actually enjoy doing, and I promise you, your intensity, you'll make so much more progress. Yeah. But yeah, go to that exrx.net. We're going to put that in the show notes below to find out any accessories. What are some of your pull compound starting movements that you really enjoy? Your pull day compounds.
I always include a deadlift on pull day. It could be barbell deadlift, sumo. I'll usually keep those, like you can do variations, but I'll typically keep it with a barbell deadlift on a pull day. And if you want some sort of variation specific to target, your hamstrings, your glutes, keep that for the leg day. How many like single arm movements do you typically do? I know we've talked about this before. I try to make sure like I always at least have in one.
I mean, especially like the single arm dumbbell row is, I think, one of the most underrated compound movements you can use, because people are like, you're hitting your lats and your rear delts a little bit. If your core is not on fire by the end of a set of dumbbell rows, check your form, right? Check your form and how you're engaging your core, because that should light your full body up. Yeah. I love like single arm dumbbell rows are some of my favorite. And I know people are hearing like deadlift too, and they're like, wait a second, deadlift on pull day, back day? Like, what are you talking about? Deadlifts, if you struggle with putting on back thickness, deadlifts are arguably one of the best exercises you can do. More than a row, more than anything else. Heavy deadlifts are one of the best things to build a thick back. And that's why they go on pull day too. So the big compounds to start them off: a barbell, sumo, or conventional deadlift, a barbell or Smith machine row, a single arm dumbbell row, a T-bar row, a lat pull down, a weighted pull up, or any variation of a pull up. Those are all ones that are great to put towards the front of your workout. The front of your workout. And again, more isolated. Go to that website if you need any help with it. But these could be cable or machine rows, right? Any sort of pull down. I like how you said it's almost overcomplicated. Anything that you are pulling something closer to your body. If it's in front of you, above you, outside of you, wherever it is, if you're pulling it to your body, you're using some sort of muscle in your back, right? That's what it's doing. You're just pulling. We're just pulling out here. Are you sumo or conventional team for deadlift?
I'm sumo, but I've actually been recently trying to do more conventional.
I'm more sumo too. I use the excuse that I'm too tall to do conventional, and my back always hurts. It gives me I feel more range of motion. Like I have more range of motion when I do a sumo. Same. I just enjoyed I hate doing conventional because I always feel in my back. No matter how many times me and Joe worked on that for a freaking year, and I couldn't. My back just would always be like, no, we're not doing this today. Yeah. And I know leg. We talked about how big of fans we are. Like starting compound, you got to do some sort of squatting movement. If it's not a barbell back squat, some sort of regression from there. Would you agree?
Yes. Yep.
Got to be. And that's, I would even argue, on any lower body day, not just push-pull leg day, that would be of your best interest, is to do some squatting movement, multi-joint muscle, multi-muscle group. Hip thrusts, one of our favorites going on, or a variation. Do you like barbell front squats? I'm not a huge fan of those either, but I know a lot of people like front squats.
No, I mean, I like goblet squats, so I guess front motion.
Yeah, it's wrist mobility is a struggle for front
I don't
squats.
like the barbell front squats at all, but I do know people that absolutely love them. I think it just comes down to kind of what your body feels most comfortable doing, but I always do like to, on leg day, program into variations of a squat.
Yeah, barbell front squats, which if you can't do like hack squats on like a sled, are awesome variations where you're doing a very similar movement to a front squat if you really want to build those quads out. Like a hack squat, a leg press. This is where I would put like a barbell or dumbbell RDL, a Romanian deadlift, and then any machine or cable isolated movement. Your leg extensions, your leg curls, your 45 hypers, your single leg press, stuff like that. Where would you put Bulgarians? As an
I was
isolated
just going to say Bulgarian. I would put Bulgarian as a starter. Yeah, compound. Because usually if someone had people don't like me, but barbell back squat, but also I'll do a Bulgarian split squat as well.
I just hate them so much.
I mean, it's different, but It's very effective. People hate them.
them.
People
I
do
love
hate them.
I hate them. I hate them. I love them. I hate them. But that's a set of exercises. I think we did a good job listing the compounds for a push, a pull, a leg. So you'd want to front load your workouts with 1, 2, potentially 3 of those movements, I would say, and then move more isolated. So an example of what, and I'll just show like not sets, reps, anything like that, but an example of like how a push day would look moving compound to isolated would be like starting with a bench press barbell, moving to a dumbbell incline bench press, then maybe a barbell overhead, and then finishing off with some dips and some cable tricep push downs. So you're starting with the bigger movers of the day and slowly moving to the less fatigue building rounds. You start with the big movements, you finish with the smaller movements where you can conserve your energy for. So that's how you usually want to lay these out. Now, like we said in the beginning, because we're going to go over some FAQs that kind of pop up, because I think a big thing is, well, how many exercises, how many sets? I think anywhere from 2 to 4 sets per exercise, and you're going to be just fine if those sets are hard sets close to failure. And how many I can't say how many exercises per day, because that 100% comes down to how many days you're working out per week. And that's why you have a little bit more flexibility working out, maybe 4, 5, or 6 days a week compared to just 3 or 4, is because you can spread that volume out a little more, where you might only need 2 pushing movements on the first day, or 2 or 3 max, which if you're just doing 1 push day a week and you want to grow for hypertrophy and strength, you're going to probably need to pack that with like 6 different exercises to really get your total volume for the week. So pay attention to that, right? And that's why we're not giving a simple answer to like, oh, pick 4 of your favorite and put them in, because that depends, right? Now, I think this is a common one. I want to hear your answer to this one that I get. A lot of people who start tracking their own sets and they take the time to actually go on their notes app and they count how many sets they did. What about multiple muscle group exercises is a question that pops up when they're setting up their total training volume. So for example, does a bench press count as just 1 set for chest, or does it count as 1 set for that week on chest, triceps, and shoulders? Would you say?
I've never been asked this question before, because it makes sense. I've always just been like chest. Yep. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because you're using multiple muscle groups, like any of those. It's like, how do you tell? And at least this is what I go with, because that's almost overthinking it. Not quite, because there's going to be
more
overlap.
often than not, you're recruiting more than one muscle group.
So, and that's where people, because you can see 2 very different workout programs, whichever way you choose to count it, where if you count like a bench press as just a chest set or a chest, tricep, and shoulder. And I would say if the individual muscle group you're counting it towards is being taken within 3 reps of failure, right? So on a bench press, for example, your triceps are supporting, your shoulders are supporting, but when you go to failure with your bench press, your chest is what's getting within failure. Your shoulders aren't what's failing out. Your triceps might be as well. So for like a bench press, for example, depending on how hard you're working, I might count that as a chest and maybe a tricep, but I don't think I'd count my shoulders for that, because they're not working in that optimal intensity range, is how I look at it. Or a simpler way, if you just want a simple rule, is if it's a primary mover, count it as like 1 set. And if it's a secondary mover, count it as like half a set. So if you're just doing tallies throughout the week, a bench press would be 1 set for chest, half a set for triceps and shoulders for one of those sets. That's an easier way to probably look at it. But it is a question that I get commonly asked, which I'm like, wait a second. It does take you to step back and you're like, there's not an exact way to do it.
Yeah. And you can also be more like, if you're in the more intermediate, I would say, what are you like to be a little bit harder on yourself and to get yourself to think more, and maybe have to be a little bit smarter about how often you're working out, how you're structuring your workouts. What is your main focus? So I find this a lot with deadlifts. So if you're doing like a glute, if you're trying to target your glutes in a deadlift, which you've got to be good with form. It's on a deadlift, you have to really pay attention to it. Don't count that as your hamstrings. Challenge yourself. Allow yourself to really think about, make sure that you are targeting your glutes, because getting yourself to think that way, again, it's a challenge. You're going to challenge yourself a bit more. Obviously, you have to recruit your hamstrings. But if that's what you're trying to focus on, you should be effective at it. You should be targeting those glutes versus this being only my hamstrings. I don't know. If you want to challenge yourself a little bit more and get creative with how you're building your workout, if you just want to pick one.
Big time.
is only allowed for one prime mover.
Yeah, smack on the wrist, not allowed. Yeah, so I mean that's an obvious question that pops up. I know another one I get is, well, is push-pull male versus female, right? I'm a female. Is this still a good split for me? And we talked about this in the training split, and I think we did a male versus female training difference episode, I think a long time ago. You got to remember, like, these principles, they're not based on sex differences. They're based on human physiology, period. Human physiology, because Marianna's muscle tissue and my muscle tissue, they're more or less the same tissue, right? They're much more similar than different, right? We're not two different animals, or I'm an alien and she's not, right? That's not how it's really separated, right? Minor changes come down to really just small shifts in an already sound training program like this one. And I think, like we talked about in that episode, that are more predicated on your individual goal. For example, if you're a girl, more females are going to prefer a leg heavy training program because people prefer what they're better at, where most men are going to prefer upper body. But if I want to build a dump truck, I shouldn't just do what most men do for push pull leg. I should do what favors my goals. So I think that's where your training splits are going to differ throughout the week. Is that a good way to put that one?
I think so too. I mean, you're going to have your ability to, like, the amount of muscle you can put on and how fast you're going to progress and all of that. That type of potential is going to differ, but the foundation and how you get there, how you build muscle, how you lose fat, how you maintain lean muscle, all of the principles are the same. Male, female, I don't care what you are. It's just comes down to individual preferences, goals, and kind of what is the most conducive for you to be successful and be consistent. I know a lot of women will, their cycle really impacts their training. Okay, so we're going to work with that. Some, they don't really take it into account and don't think they need to. But those are individual differences that, one, definitely deserve to be accounted for, but it doesn't mean that the foundation is any different or your ability to improve is any different. Yeah, I hope that's something that people are starting to get a little bit more used to.
Or if it's a new thought to think about, you're like, wait a second, I've never thought about it like that. Think about it. Think about it a little bit. So all in all, what did we learn today? We learned what a push-pull split really is based on, right? Hit and heavy compounds. We learned that above all else, however you're going to set up your week, because it's like we could technically give you a sample push-pull leg in this episode to show you what it could look like, but that could be different if you're working out 3 days a week, 4 days a week, 5 days a week, 6 days a week. So many variables change, but now you know what really matters. How many hard sets are you doing per week? 8 to 20 hard sets per muscle group per week. Training with the majority of your training around 80 to 85% of your one repetition max, which if you don't know what your one rep max is, you can calculate that. We'll even put a calculator down below from like bodybuilding.com to help you figure that out so you can see what weight range you might want to think about. All right. We figured out how to set up a push-pull leg split based on how many days you want. Are you doing it 2 days or 2 times a week? Are you doing it one time? How are you implementing or making it a hybrid with anything else? We learned the big compound movements to set up each day. I don't think we left anything out of this one. I don't think we did.
Yeah.
For push-pull leg. And reminder again, we made the training program, which is going to be dropping this Friday for all premium users. That's just $5 a month, where we do the weekly Q&A episodes. Every single Friday we do those, but we also do cool stuff like this, where we drop a 12-week training program with progressive overload already set in, all going to be trackable in Google Sheets. So you can actually track your workouts as you go along to make sure you make progress. And honestly, we think that's the best way to learn, is to go through the trenches. So not just take this, but now how do we apply it? Boom. I'm not gonna lie, we had a lot of debate too if we should even do this, because it's $5 a month, and most training programs online sell for 40, 50,
people
60,
sell
70,
training
$80.
programs for so much money, and it's like, what? I mean,
I know it's insane how much some people do, but we try and pour everything into our premium over there because we don't want to be selling anything crappy, whatever it is. So premium users, keep an eye out. We'll be shooting that to your inbox this Friday, and then we have it always if you decide to sign up after that. $5 a month. If you want to jump over there, that's in the show notes down below. But we'll talk to all you premium users on Friday, breaking down that split even further. And we'll talk to everybody else next month.
Next week.
Yeah? Next week. Next week. All right. We'll talk to y'all soon.